Welcome to our first lecture for our first module in comparative literature and film. I've set up this recorded lecture to work with our reading module, and I'll work like this for part of each of our classes. I'm going to ask you to read certain pages either before or after you screen to either ground what you're watching or to open up what you're watching. So right now, I'd like us to really think about the course, think about the course outline, what we'll, of course, end up talking about in the first two classes for sure, which is how are we going to read the comparative literature and film that I'm setting up for you this term. I've set it up, first of all, with Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is our written text, almost our script on which every other idea is really going to sit. And we're really going to use this play and read it in a very particular manner. So Romeo and Juliet is really our foundation. And then I've chosen a series of films, which I think are really great films because they embody really different and intense love stories. None, thankfully, as tragic as Romeo and Juliet, which we'll talk about today too. And from a film studies perspective, we're going to be able to think about these films in response to the indie film, the blockbuster, and the contemporary European film as opened up on your course outline. So I want us to really organize Romeo and Juliet in the way I'm going to ask you to read this play for the film work to come. We really need to think about reading. And you'll notice I'll say that a lot, right? Well, how do you read this part of the text? And you'll all kind of be like, I don't know, you just read it for me. When I say reading, I mean, how do you interpret it? What's your understanding of it? What do you feel a particular scene or representation or interaction or conflict or connection might mean? And these are ideas we'll, of course, explore throughout the term. And in short, when we look at a college curriculum and we think about the constructed notion of reading, of which all of your profs will ask you to do, we're looking at ways for you to understand the meaning of a text, interpreting it, moving beyond plot detail, and really exploring a text for its larger messages and its deeper significations. You'll notice as well that this term I've organized everything in response to one very small word, which can get a little slippery, a little hard to pin down. And the word is desire. You'll notice, I mean, we all have our teaching styles, but you'll notice I will frequently not say words like love or passion. And I'll say, well, how do we understand the representation of desire? And you'll probably end up wanting to yell at me a bit, but hopefully you won't. And instead, it'll allow you to think about how desire is a stronger word than love. In many ways, as we're going to see with our last film and the filmmaker, we'll look at some pretty fun interviews for our last text in the course, is that desire will often form what we understand as a discourse, a language almost, a verbal interchange that reflects ideas, something we can almost see as a conversation within a given text, right? The discourse of desire within each of our texts forms a conversation, a way that we interpret the different messages we're seeing as if they're almost speaking to one another. Some people feel that a discourse needs to be formal and orderly, and I think in its end product, it always is. But when we look at the artistic construction of discourses, especially a discourse based on desire, we realize that desire really isn't anything but formal or orderly. And it's usually overwhelming, uncontrollable, and once it starts, it needs to continue and finish. It's almost like a living entity unto itself. Desire is yearning, connection, passion. Think about other cliches we might like soul connecting. When we think about desire, we think about a drive within a human being and what makes the human spirit rather incredible. So I've arranged this course in a lot of ways to reveal that desire really needs to be read as a discourse. And this way we can debate and dig into and pick apart the ideas that are really a series of representations, either in a written text or a visual one, and that these ideas, sometimes even ideologies, and we'll certainly see ideologies with the second text and possibly the fourth one, they're in flux, they're in movement, especially when we're in college, right? Desire is what we all search for ourselves, another part of ourselves, maybe someone else at some point. Our careers are what we really want. And it, in many ways, desire makes us tick. And when we lose desire, as many people do as they grow older, and they might want to reconsider that, they stop ticking. They stop living through their heart and they start living through order. We need order. We must have an orderly part of ourselves. But I would like to believe that the great stories we're going to look at this term show us that we need to kind of follow our hearts as well. But the journey that the heart will take us on is almost premeditated. In other words, we don't really know where we're going to go till we're there. And then as our characters in our play and then in our films show us, these desires become almost greater than the worlds themselves. Now, star-crossed lovers is the cliche that we always say when we talk about Romeo and Juliet. And I think that the premise of Romeo and Juliet and all the texts I've chosen are star-crossed lovers. I mean, what two lovers aren't star-crossed in some way, right? What love stories show us two people who are on equal playing ground, where everything's to their advantage and super easy to orchestrate and mitigate and thus almost move through in some easy way. This doesn't sound like a love story. A love story always has ups and downs, complications, obstacles, and because the texts that I've chosen show us that the settings actually lack a certain level of stasis, which is good because these are often socio-political commentaries as well. Our characters find themselves in situations that are really well beyond our understanding of the real. Their love, their desire for one another, it's almost like a net goes over them, and there they are. And their stories remain incredible. So I want us to think about all of our films, and Romeo and Juliet especially, as incredible, as important love stories that help us learn about ourselves and the world as well. The nice part of what your profs are probably referring to as asynchronous parts of the course, the parts where we might ask you to read from a module and screen a lecture before we meet with you through a live stream, are really new to college education right now, to education right now. And this really puts you in the driver's seat where, unlike a conventional college course, which would either have a lecture or a seminar in a beginning, middle, and end, you can screen any of my recorded lectures as many times as you need to, and you can consult the module as you need to, and you can do this in part or in full. So for this lecture, I would have already asked you, I hope, to read Module 1, Parts 1 to 3. Our class discussion is really going to open up Parts 1 and 2 so we can fully understand the Shakespearean stage, as well as the universal themes and larger ideas that really hold together Romeo and Juliet. And in some ways, I'm hoping that we'll be able to understand what makes a good love story work, and of course, what makes Romeo and Juliet work. My overall suggestion to trying to figure out what makes this play work is twofold: conflict and characters. So when we have a great love story, we just can't have characters that we adore. We need them. But we've got to have some kind of intrinsic conflict that's external, so that the characters hold an internal conflict on how they'll actually negotiate the spaces of the external conflict. In Romeo and Juliet, we know it's the feud between two families and the prince decreeing that there will be no more violence in Verona. And then these characters, of course, find themselves from the conflicting and feuding households. Now, by having conflict working through a text, and Romeo and Juliet will crystallize this for us through our first part of the course, we'll realize that we get to see the characters in different ways because they're consistently responding to the conflict of their world. As a result, the viewer and the reader wants to continue. We want to see the solutions to the external and the internal conflict. And of course, we want to see where the love story is going to go. We want to see what happens to our star-crossed lovers. Can they uncross? And we'll notice that sometimes yes, and sometimes no in the text that I've chosen. I feel, so if you asked me why I chose these texts or why I'm designing this course this way, I feel that our lovers, the lovers we read about in these great pieces I've chosen for you this term, reflect ourselves. Maybe not every text, right? You can't take a big class and hope that all of you are going to connect on a deep level to all our characters, but some of them will, and they will hit deep, and I'm speaking from experience. You'll be hit deeply by these characters. You might see another part of yourself. I would see a younger part of myself in some of the texts. Some of you all will see older parts of yourselves, selves you might imagine as you grow. We might see our secret selves, wishing we could love as eloquently or as freely or as charismatically as the characters we meet. And in many ways, I know for myself, when I have a play or a novel or a film that embodies desire on a level that I think just is extraordinary, it's almost that I wish I could be one of the characters. In short, the desire that the characters embody often mimetically reflects our own desires, our own yearnings, our own want for adventure and love, and of course, the human need to be loved. The conflicts at hand that we're going to see from Romeo and Juliet onwards will cause us as readers and viewers to connect, to feel, and I hope to become enveloped within the story itself in the same way that the lovers that we read about find themselves embraced in each other's arms repeatedly. Now, why Romeo and Juliet? We all love Romeo and Juliet. I've seen a couple of adaptations of it. I know they're going to die, but I want to go see it. We watch the play or we watch a film version. We think, oh, it's going to be different this time. Somehow the ending will be constructed differently. And only in the 1996 film version, which I will send you to outside of class time, providing you have the time, does the director shift the ending of the film a bit, and it really makes what happens powerful. And this film version has some very interesting takes and interpretations, and others which I don't like. But what's strong about this film, especially the portrayal of the titular characters by a young Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, it remains pretty impressive. And I hope you'll find some time to at least screen part of it. Now, the conflict at hand in Romeo and Juliet is the volatile world in part, but it's also the opposition of the characters themselves. And what I'm going to set forth as I wrap up today, so my last little bit of what I'm going to be talking